And I think, yeah, you could use exactly the same thing, to go back to the pelvic infection scenario, that it's happening in, perhaps late teens or whatever, maybe gets treated, maybe doesn't get treated, and the consequences then come back and with a vengeance in, a decade later. And I think, PCOS, another example, sometimes you end up with ladies who, as part of their PCOS profile, present initially with a BMI in the high 30s, and certainly in the UK, when they very frequently need NHS treatment for their infertility, it can take them 2 or 3 years to get their BMI to a range where they're even eligible. And for lots of those ladies or couples, they need the NHS treatment. They don't have £5,000 in the bank, unless they borrow from their parents or sell their car or whatever. So I think there's all these areas where, in different ways, delaying motherhood for all kinds of reasons causes more problems in terms of the underlying condition, management of the condition. And the one that causes me the most sadness, I see more of it in Manchester even than I did in Sheffield, is career women as well, which is a different thing. But I suppose the one thing that we are seeing more of now is a lot more women coming through to electively freeze their eggs, who are not in relationships, who are perhaps in their, I think the only thing is at the moment we're seeing a lot of them in their mid to late 30s. We might be better to see them in their, round about 30, late 20s, when they've really no idea where their life's sort of pathways going, but they're freezing oocytes at a point where they statistically have a much better chance of subsequently getting pregnant. But it's coming through into the psyche, I think, within the UK, that for those ladies who are often doing very well in their careers or businesses or whatever, that actually they need to be thinking about it in terms of fertility before they're actually ready to make those decisions in their own life. And I think that's, again, in the last decades, that's changing a lot. I think there's an awareness coming through, even from, girls leaving school or going into college or whatever, that it is something that, if they're looking down long career pathways, they need to consider it, whether they be medicine or law or business and finance and banking and, all those things where you have to commit to, probably your mid-30s before you're necessarily in a position to step off the treadmill. So I think, the whole area of delaying motherhood is a massive issue, because, as you say, from a clinical perspective, very, very relevant as well, but also that these very large, numbers of ladies who, delay it for professional career-based reasons. And I think they need to be actively encouraged to think about it when they're 30, rather than suddenly when they're approaching 40, realizing, actually, I'd really like to have a child now. And it's heartbreaking. It's so difficult. So yeah, lots of important issues there. And yeah, I think endometriosis is very important in terms of being frequently missed. I'd have to say, I think it's not just missed in primary care, it's missed in secondary care. There's a lot of referrals go, and it's a difficult decision, because gynecologists get criticised when they have a negative laparoscopy. Those kind of things are audited, and it isn't always obvious from the history examination, and sometimes scans are normal. And things like MRI are valuable resources. You don't always have access to those. But I think different gynecologists I know have different sort of levels of suspicion about it, and have different, trigger points for deciding whether someone needs a laparoscopy. And, there's numerous examples through my career where ladies who've ended up being diagnosed with, I had a lady within the last 5 or 6 years, she ended up not having to have, she couldn't have any children. She'd been seen by various gynecologists, and I then referred her. She'd changed practice because a GP wasn't taking her seriously. And she was a receptionist, a medical receptionist. And the first time I saw her, I thought, I utterly believe you. And I referred her through to one of my colleagues in Sheffield that I'd worked with for many years, who does a lot of endometriosis related to fertility. And I mean, a few weeks later, he showed me the DVD of her laparoscopy, and it was just about the worst pelvis he'd been in a decade. And she was 26, and he ended up doing as much surgery as he could to preserve her fertility. But she'd been essentially criticised previously for requesting too much analgesia. People thought she was just not coping with the pain. Well, welcome to her world. And she's ended up now with curative surgery, and she's much better. But the curative surgery was very difficult, and she's not got any children, and she's probably about 30 now. So, I think it's a condition per se, along with PCOS, which is the other good example you brought up, where diagnosis is frequently delayed, put it that way. Definitely in primary care, but also often in secondary care, poorly managed in primary care, and I think often poorly managed in secondary care as well. So, those and these are not rare conditions. They're very, very common conditions, and of great relevance to female health. So I think everyone needs to do better, really, from top to bottom, really. So